All participants are in a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's call. At that time, if you would like to ask a question, please press star 1. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, please disconnect at this time. I will now turn the meeting over to Ms. Joyce Rose. You may begin.
Thank you, and welcome to the Procurement and Contract Management webinar series brought to you on behalf of the Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families, Children's Bureau, and presented by ICF International. Today our topic is Writing and Evaluating the Request for Proposal. I am Joyce Rose, your host and moderator for today's webinar. Changes in funding availability and priority mean that opportunities for in-person discussions and networking among professionals working on agency child welfare IT systems are limited. As an alternative, the Division of State Systems within the Children's Bureau is offering a series of webinars supporting information sharing and discussion. The content of the webinars is structured so as to appeal to a wide audience participating in an agency's child welfare IT initiatives, including state and tribal child welfare staff. All webinars are recorded and published on the Children's Bureau website listed on this slide. With that, I would like to invite Terry Watt, Director of the Division of State Systems, Children's Bureau, to welcome today's attendees. Terry?
Thank you, Joyce. Good afternoon or morning to all of you. Hope you're warm. I know a lot of you are in some cold weather. Today we are going to hear from Dave Jennings, who is a member of the vendor community that works with public agencies to build human service information systems. We'll hear his views and ideas on writing and evaluating RFPs, and hopefully you'll be able to learn some things that will help you as you try to write your own RFPs. The presentation, as Joyce said, is part of a series of webinars that we are sponsoring through our technical assistance vendor, ICF International. We hope you find the information useful as you conduct procurement in your various jurisdictions. And I say jurisdictions because I do want to announce that as of today's presentation, we have extended invitations to these technical assistance webinars to our tribal 4E grantees and programs so that they may also learn from them. With that, let me hand it back to you, Joyce.
Thanks, Terry. As I mentioned previously, today's webinar in the Procurement and Contract Management series is entitled Writing and Evaluating an RFP, which I think you will find unique and interesting as Terry said, it is being presented from a vendor's point of view. Subsequent planned webinar topics are negotiating and managing a contract, managing small projects, managing scope creep and change orders, and then saying goodbye to your vendor. Elizabeth, would you change the slide, please? The remaining webinars through June, July, August, and September are subject to discussion at this time. So please watch for information regarding the topics of those particular webinars. We are very interested in knowing, all of our attendees are encouraged to participate in our webinars with questions and comments. All of the participant lines are muted now, but we will open them for the 2 planned Q&A sessions. One session will occur midway through the presentation and the other at the end of the presentation. Please be aware that you can submit questions at any time using the GoToWebinar chat feature, and those will be addressed during the 2 Q&A sessions. Now, should we run out of time, we will be happy to respond to your questions via email, and or should you have additional questions, you may submit those to me at the email address listed on the slide, joyce@kassets.com. So we are very interested in knowing who is attending this webinar, as it is our intent throughout all of the webinars to make the content applicable and attractive for everyone participating in an agency's child welfare information system effort. We ask that you self-select one of the 5 categories listed above or listed on the slide. Elizabeth, would you please conduct the poll?
I will. So at this time, you should see on your screen the options for who is attending today's webinar. And I see people are starting to respond. We'll just give you a few seconds to we still have a few responses coming in. Only about half of you have voted, so if you could get in there and cast your vote so we know who's participating today. Okay, we're up to 75% now. I'll just leave it open for a few more seconds. Okay. And so it looks like today we have 28% of our participants are State Child Welfare Information System project managers, 33% are State Child Welfare Information System program, policy, or technical staff. We didn't have any tribal child welfare project managers or staff that indicated they're participating. We do still have some people coming into the webinar, though, so I hope they'll be joining us a little bit later. And the remaining participants are ACF Children's Bureau personnel or ACF contractors.
Okay, Elizabeth, thank you very much. And attendees, thank you for self-selecting your discipline. Again, we hope to have some of the tribal child welfare people join us prior to the end of the to the webinar. So let's now take a quick look at today's agenda. Elizabeth, if you could get to that slide.
Yes, that should be up. Oh, let me hide the poll. Sorry. There you go.
Thank you. So the format of today's webinar is an introduction of the participants followed by approximately a 60-minute presentation. And also a reminder that today's webinar, we're going to have 2 attendee Q&A sessions, and then we will end with a short wrap-up. So let's move to the introduction of our key presenter. Dave Jennings. Mr. Jennings has over 35 years of experience in system project management and business development to the state health and human services community. Over the span of Dave's career, he has worked with the ACF TANF, Food Stamp, SNAP, Medicaid, Child Care, Child Support, WIC, Public Health, and Unemployment Insurance Programs. He leads business development for SLI Global Solutions with a current focus on providing IB&V and QA support on complex state health and human service IT implementations. In his role as Director of Business Development at SLI and previously at Northrop Grumman, Dave has analyzed and responded to hundreds of state RFPs. In addition to leading capture teams, Dave has served as as Director of Proposal Operations, responsible for managing proposal resources and production. Elizabeth, could you move to slide 7, please? Dave is an active member and former chair of ICTAG, which is an association of health and human service contractors promoting the intelligent application of IT to the delivery and administration of health and human services programs. He has also served on APD reform initiatives and the ISM Conference Planning Committee. We are so pleased to bring a person with Dave's credentials to our webinar series. And myself, I retired from the state of Wisconsin and have been directly involved with several ACF Children's Bureau-sponsored training events since 2004. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Jennings. Dave?
Hey, thanks a lot, Joyce. I appreciate that intro. You know, the 35-year part, that gets a little old after a while. I couldn't be the smartest guy in the room, so I decided to stay in the room longer than anybody else, and so that might be one of the reasons I've been asked to join. But I'm very honored to be here with this group and to discuss a little bit with you about how we look at RFPs from the vendor community in a way that you might hear some things that it might impact and influence how you put your RFPs together that might not communicate as much risk, needless risk. And that's what we're talking about. So at the end of this session, hopefully that you'll be able to recognize the value of each section of an RFP, from the vendor's viewpoint, that you'll be able to align your RFP requirements with the procurement type that it belongs in, and obviously what we all want, both on the state and the vendor community, is to have better RFPs so that you get in more responses, better responses, and innovative solutions on that. I do have a little bit of disclaimer. These opinions in this presentation are basically my own. They're not from my employer or any other organization, and they're just put out there for you to think about and see if it works for you or not. Okay. So let's go ahead to the next slide, Elizabeth, please. So the first thing we want to do is, what are the different procurement types? Well, there's a lot of different ways to slice that pie, but I sliced it into 3 slices. And commodities, and that's our friends hardware and software, professional services, and solutions. And I think these are about 90% of the procurement types that you're going to run into in doing the things that you do. So let's go through them one at a time, and we'll move on to the next slide and take a closer look at commodities. Well, if you're developing a commodity RFP, if you're buying hardware and software, well, what are the types of characteristics that would be in there? Well, you should be able to describe the item you're buying with precision. You should know exactly what it is you want, how many you want, when and where do you need them. Now, why you need them, not so much. You really don't have to spend a lot of time explaining why you need Oracle or why you need a particular type of server on that. But you do need precision here in these areas. On the RFP sections you should pay the most attention to, in my opinion, would be obviously in specifying and defining that item that you're buying, which in this case would be a deliverable, and the payment terms. Because if it's the same item, the price becomes the key evaluation criteria. And that's why this is described as a procurement type commodity. And commodities distinguish themselves almost primarily on price. So if you get the lowest price compliant bidder on something that you've described well, that should be the winner. And these are pretty straightforward. Let's go to the next one slide, please, and we'll take a look at professional services. On professional services, you're buying some staff. That's what you think that those staff are going to do tasks that you need done. So as you're putting together that RFP for professional services, well, this could be for a staff augmentation contract, for a project management office, for a feasibility study, for an alternative analysis of different types of systems, those types of things. You should describe, what is it you require of these people? What are the credentials of the people who you want to perform this work? How many people you need? And when and where are they needed? Here, the key RFP sections are the scope of work / services, the corporate quals, staff quals, and references. When you evaluate, you're going to primarily be looking at the people, the staffing, the rates. So here is kind of the 3 R's rule. It's not up here, but it's rates, references, and resumes. And as you take a look at that, the best value should have the highest qualified staff at competitive rates, maybe not the lowest rate. If your procurement allows you not to award to other than the lowest bidder, you might be looking for a best value award. Okay, let's move on. Well, this is a horse of a different color here, a solution procurement. A solution could be a system, could be a system of systems, could be an entire enterprise, an enterprise architecture with multiple systems and then interoperating with each other. There's a lot to think about here. This is a combination of hardware, software, and people that hopefully combines to create a desired state that you want to get to. So as you're putting together a solution RFP, you want to think about what is the problem that you need solved. What are the desired outcomes, which would be how, when you get those outcomes, maybe that'll tell you that you solved those problems. The performance standards, deadlines. Deadlines are key here. Deadlines, you can read schedule into that. When you're putting together the RFP sections and what you need to pay attention to, you need to pay attention to them all. You know, I don't think we need to read through this, but scope of work, background, roles and responsibilities, deliverables, acceptance criteria, term of the contract, and there's more on the next page. Payments, and their evaluation criteria should be the technical approach, the solution, and how that solution is going to be implemented within your existing environment. Past performance, have these people done it before? The qualifications of the staff, and the fixed price. So here, the best value would be the highest scoring technical approach. Who's got the solution and the approach you like the best? Who has the best past performance? And here's one here. Who has the least exception to your T's and C's? Those are terms and conditions at a competitive fixed price. If one vendor's proposal rises to that level, there's a good chance that that's the one you're going to select. Okay, Elizabeth, let's move on. Okay, and this little chart here is trying to show, and I think it's fairly obvious, that from a scale of complexity on the vertical and risk on the horizontals, that commodities are the least complex and the lowest risk. Services are somewhere in between. And solutions literally can be off the chart in both complexity and risk, depending on the scope of what you're trying to accomplish. You know, while that solutions is represented in my icon here as a button, that's not the easy button from Staples. These are extremely complex. So let's talk about risk a little bit. If we go to the next slide. So here's my friend the rhinoceros, and when he's out looking at things in the world that he lives in and occupies, he kind of always sees this thing in the foreground on that. Vendors are the same way. We look at RFPs in our world through a lens of risk. And when we see it, we need to react. That's pretty much our job, and that's in our DNA as well. So just like the rhino. Okay, on the next one, risk is a four-letter word. It seriously is. In corporate America, the people who run the biggest corporations in the United States that are in this business, the Accenture, the Deloitte, IBM, CGI, nothing strikes fear in their heart more than the words fixed price system development. When you see fixed price system development, your company is making a bet that on a certain day you're going to deliver a solution that will satisfy the client. And if you don't, bad things happen. These projects are viewed as the riskiest projects in corporate America. There's a tendency to have solutions that are more cost-oriented now, that big chunks of the solution are already put together to try to reduce that risk. When corporate America sees risk, they only have one cure for risk, and that's more money, higher revenue. So this is a complex calculation that corporations make between fear of risk and greed for money. And that's what drives the business decision, and most importantly, the bid decision. And most importantly, it drives the costing of, we're going to put a bid in, but we're going to price that risk in there. If your RFP doesn't put risk in needlessly and is very clear on what risks you're concerned about, which would be the risks that have a probability of occurring, not the possibility of occurring. If your RFP speaks to that, you can reduce the risk factors built into vendors' responses. You'll get increased competition, and you'll get decreased cost. Risk is there. It's a real deal, and especially in the solution side, and it should not be ignored. But don't pile on risks that are really unlikely to occur in there to try to take a shotgun approach. Try a more surgical approach, looking at other states that are tried to accomplish the same thing you have, and come up with those risks that are most concerned to you and address those appropriately. Let's go to the next slide here. Well, this is the wall of worry, and this is what I have to climb and all my counterparts have to climb every time we open up an RFP. And internally, we gather around the campfire. We call ourselves a capture team. And we go before a gate review committee, and we try to compete for what's called bid and proposal dollars, B&P, so that we can bid. So in this wall of worry, we have key staff, references, NDEs, SLAs, bonds, and so on and so forth, holdbacks, cash flow, T's and C's, liquidated damages. All of these are bricks on the wall. And the more bricks you put on, the higher the wall is, the harder it is to get over and climb internally, and the less likelihood that you're going to get multiple bids associated with it. Okay. I think we're up to one more slide here before Q&A. So cause and effect. So over on the left, there's a guy on a tightrope at the top walking across a swamp full of alligators, and those are the risks. And these are the causes. And on the right, the vendors have placed a cushion under that to replace the alligator, and that cushion is money. That's the increased revenue that they've built into their costing. So your job as the agency is to protect the agency, protect the state from shoddy workmanship and schedule slippage, and from not taking advantage of the new technology that you're paying for. And so you have a series of protections. You have holdbacks. So if the deliverable we were going to give $100,000, you hold back 20% on each of the deliverables. You have bonds. There's bid bonds, performance bonds. You have penalties if certain things aren't met. You have warranties, which I think are pretty much useless. I really don't see many states getting much value out of their warranty as they move from DDI, design, development, implementation, into production, because that vendors, you've got them in there doing M&O work probably. The other cause that you have is to transfer risk from the agency to the vendor. You can do that by payments tied to external approvals. And well, you're not, the vendor, you're not going to get paid for the final delivery of the system until the feds come in and approve it. Okay, well, that adds a lot of risk. We haven't met those feds. They might not have been with us. Or you have some other governing board that's an external approver. That's a lot of risk to us. Penalties tied to non-system milestones or performance. If you have an outcome or a performance measure that's not system related, the people building your system don't want to sign up for it. On the protections, what vendors do is they bake loaded cost of money into pricing. If I have to go out and get a bond, the surety company charges me money. I put that into the bid and I load it. I load it with profit, with fee, with overhead. And so if the bond costs $100,000, by the time it gets to you, it probably costs about $175,000. On the risk, we increase something called management reserve, and management reserve is kind of a slush fund. It's a bucket of money that's put out there that these bad things happen. We've got some money here over and above the money we think it's required to put this solution in that we can dip into when we get in trouble. And if we avoid that risk or eliminate it or mitigate it to some degree, that MR, that management reserve, goes into profit. It's not returned to the state. So we need to be careful of our cause because it will have an effect. These things on the left aren't necessarily bad things. They're appropriate when they're appropriate. Okay, I think we're up to the first Q&A.
Thank you.
I'd like to take about 10 minutes and see if there's any questions on what we've discussed so far, which is a high-level view of risk and different procurement types and the complexities associated with them.
Thank you, sir. We will now begin the question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question, please press *1 and record your first name clearly when prompted. Your name is required to introduce your question. To withdraw your question, you may press *2. Once again, if you would like to ask a question, please press *1. One moment, please, for our first question.
While we're waiting, we do have one question that's come in online, and I don't know if you might be planning to talk about this later, but could you mention one or two things that would make a vendor say sort of right off the bat, I'm not going to bid on this?
Yeah, I am going to talk about that, but the very first thing that comes to my mind is the mandatory corporate qualifications. Do I need them or do I not? And when you say mandatory, we look at it that way. So if it's mandatory that I've built a child welfare information system in a state that had a caseload of 2 million, and I haven't, because mine's in a state with a caseload of 1 million, I might ask a question, but if it's still 2 million, I can't get around that. That would be one. And I think we'll see some others as we go through it.
Okay. Perfect. Millicent, do we have any callers online?
No, at this time we do not have any questions in queue.
Okay. Well, why don't we go ahead and move on then?
Okay. And you had asked for a time check. We are right at about 2:30, so we have about an hour left.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you. We're on slide 20 now. Now, for the rest of the presentation, we're going to look at each section of a typical RFP. And for most of these sections, we're going to look at it from the perspective of a solution procurement, not really a commodity. And on a few of them, we'll certainly be looking at it not just as a solution, but for professional staffing as well, such as key personnel qualifications. So you can see them here, and you may have some that are named different, or you may have some that you leave out and others that you add in. This is pretty typical of what we're going to see in most RFPs. So let's go to the first one in the statement of purpose. So for the rest of the slides in this deck, the blue font is going to be the name of the section, and it's a little description about what a state might expect to put in there. And the black font after that is, this is how, your vendor representative today, Dave Jennings, would look at it on that. And you see my little raining risk icon on the right, and what we're trying to do is protect ourselves from that. So the statement of purpose, what are you looking for? Well, what I want to see in a statement of purpose is, what's driving this procurement? Why are you going through this bother? Is it a new legislation like the Affordable Care Act? Is it a new business model? Are you doing business in a different way where you used to be online, and now you're going to, I'm not online, it used to be in person, and now you're going to go with more of a call center. There's technical advancements that are out there that you're not taking advantage of, and the efficiency of your people would be greatly improved. Or do you have staffing cuts? Is your governor telling you to cut staff, and when they tell you to cut staff and workload's not cut, pretty much technology is about the only lifeboat you got out there. And when this system is up, in your statement of purpose, what will it accomplish? Will things be better, faster, cheaper? This is kind of important. I'm interested in this. What's driving your narrative drives what's driving your purpose here, your procurement, drives my narrative of what I'm writing to. If it's a new business model, that's a different thing than technological advances. It can also impact my team of who I go out to look for to join my team. These are usually done pretty well, I think, in most of the RFPs that I see. But this does need some attention, and it's not just an afterthought. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're going to talk of background information. And this is all pretty key stuff here for vendors on the background, the agency, the operations, user demographics. What I really want to know is who owns this procurement. I mean, who's going to own the solution? Not just the procurement part. I apologize for that, but who's going to own the solution? I'd like to see an org chart. I'd like to know somebody's in charge, that there is a single person at some part in the organization that is in charge of this engagement. I'm very concerned if it's been tried before, and what happened, and why are you doing this again if it's been before? You know, and your funding, is your team in place? I'm concerned about, are there other vendors involved? And, you know, who wrote the RFP, for example? Are you going to cut away, you know, some of this and give it to some other vendor? I'm very curious about all of these things. If the agency is split or merged in the recent past, I'd like to know that. I'd like to know about the relationship, formal or otherwise, between your state IT shop and the child welfare program. I'd like to know if you have any consent decrees out there. And I'd like to know how any of those things relate to this procurement. Okay, next slide, please. Scope of work is the agency defining a solution or a problem. Where RFPs in the vendor community are kind of in a transition period here between, should an RFP define a solution, or should it define a problem and let the vendors define the solution? Traditionally, RFPs, the CWIS, child support, eligibility system, were some pretty large documents. Big appendices, every requirement known to man down there, very prescriptive, you know, telling you exactly what you want, when, you know, how it's going to work. Is it going to be turn to the right or turn to the left on this screw? Really getting down into the weeds. And that kind of made sense when the systems that were being built were being custom coded. Most systems now that you're going to see, most proposals coming to you are not going to be, we're going to code from scratch. They're going to transfer in from another state. They're going to, big parts of it are going to come from COTS. And they're going to, you know, you've got to be willing, if you're going to accept the COTS or another state system, is to maybe change some of your processes where you can, so that you don't have to recode things and go in there and take the back off of the TV, and that adds a lot of risk going into a COTS to change it just so that it can meet an existing process that you have. So many states are transitioning into describing the problem. This is my problem. I'm not getting the information I need at this time from these sources. And don't get down into prescribing what the technology needs to be. And that's going to continue for quite some time. I think this is very key, and I think it's something serious that you should think about between the IT and the program people and the procurement people. Before you start writing your scope of work, are you going to define the problem, or are you going to define the solution? If you define the solution, many vendors are going to think you've already seen what you want. And if you define a problem, more likely you're going to get more responses. This can be, to one of the caller's questions on what can kill the job right away, is an unrealistic schedule. That 12 months to put up a statewide system of any type, where you have to train people, do conversion, roll out any type of software, hardware. That's not a schedule. That's a death march, and everybody will suffer the consequences of. It's been done a couple of times, and it was done on the Sackless World in Oklahoma back in the day in the 90s. But you really have to have some realistic schedule, and the schedule is not realistic. It's that risk can overcome the greed for many organizations. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Yeah, and we talked about this with the question that the corporate quals is the first brick in the wall of worry. And if I can't climb over that brick, I'm done. So look at and take these seriously, and be careful about what you require as a mandatory qualification. In the example we were talking about in terms of caseload, is it really that important to you? If you know of a solution in one state that has 50% of your caseload or 75% of your caseload, and that state's very happy with it, you're not even going to consider that in your state just because you're a little bigger on that? Do you really think that the technologists and engineers won't be able to figure out how to scale that? Because that wipes out a whole lot, especially if you're a big state. You're Texas, New York, California, and you put in, it's got to be the same caseload as mine. Then, well, you're kind of limited to one, maybe two solutions out there, if any. So you look to see if they're too loose, if you haven't thought about all, are they too restrictive? Do subcontractor qualifications count? I think they should. And is there any conflict of interest if has anybody worked on the RFP that you're putting out and they're not allowed to bid? That's nice to put in there. Next slide, please. Okay, so key personnel qualifications. This would obviously apply to the services, professional services, procurement types, as well as the solution types on that. But are your qualifications reasonable? I've seen qualifications of people that literally don't exist. They need 5 years of health insurance exchange experience. Well, they haven't been around 5 years. They need to be expert in Java and .NET and COBOL. Well, that's kind of an odd duck. You don't see that walking down the street very often. How many key staff do you have? Is everyone on the team key? That seems a little bit of a stretch. Can an out-of-state vendor win? I mean, do you have it in there on your qualifications that these people would have to move to your state to actually be awarded the job? Can credentials be substituted by experience? In terms of PMI, which I have a strong belief in PMI, that's a great certification for your program management. But someone who's got 20 years of management, would you allow that to be, to substitute? Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. but don't be silent on it. And can subs be key? And I think they probably should be. Why are they even on the team if you're not getting some key staff or some key part of your solution from them? Next slide, please, Elizabeth. Okay, so outcome and performance standards. These take a lot of thought to write up good ones as you're putting together the RFP. You know, I'd like to see are the outcomes realistic, and most importantly, are they related to the system? The system is not going to give you a better program, and if that's your outcome, it's hard for people who build systems to stand up to that. The system can provide better access to information so that hopefully better trained staff can do things in a more efficient manner, which could result in a better program. But workers could ignore the system as well. And as a vendor, I don't want to be responsible for that. So you'd like to know what exactly those measures are and who's making those measurements. Keep them related to what you're buying. And if the outcome is that everybody's going to be happier, that's not a good one, because that rarely happens. Next one, please. Deliverables. You know, these are key things. This is kind of how we get paid on the vendor community. You have payments tied to deliverables. So getting deliverables approved, if the process is seen as inefficient by the vendor community, we'll put a lot of risk in there for that. So who does the approval process? How many bites of the apple? So I give you a draft or a deliverable, and you make comments on several sections, and I give you that back, and because I've taken care of those comments, and then you have some cite deficiencies on sections that you didn't cite the first time. We call that another bite of the apple, and it sets up a self-perpetuating vicious cycle of eating up time. And not meeting those schedules, there's probably some penalties associated with that down the road. So this is important. Complex systems RFPs can have 100 deliverables. And if you're going to look at a deliverable expectation document up front and approve that, and the draft and the initial, and you're going to take 2 weeks to do all of those things, well, your project's not long enough to take care of that. So try to be a little, look at that and make sure that you're not really cramming things in. You might want to bundle some deliverables together into one document. Like in a project management plan could have the communication plan in there, the risk management plan in there, the change configuration plan in there, all that into one document with separate sections, rather than each of these be independent deliverables with independent approvers on your side of the fence. Next slide, please. The term of the contract is usually pretty straightforward. There's usually a number of base years with a system. There's usually some option years in there for maintenance. Obviously, vendors prefer long-term contracts, and they're looked at more favorably, and they're more attractive to the business model of a system DDI vendor in the state and local marketplace. Is pretty much all the risk is on the front end. And when you get into operations and maintenance, that's kind of keeping the hum of the system going, and that's an annuity revenue stream, and that helps spread the risk across a longer life of the project on that. But this is pretty straightforward. Next slide, please. Okay, this is one that gets a lot of attention from vendors. Payments, incentives, and penalties. And there's money in a mousetrap down there. And what we're trying to say to you need some mousetraps with your money. That's sure. If you're not getting the level of performance that everybody agreed to, there should be penalties associated. You should be protected. But you wouldn't go out and buy multiple policies, insurance policies for your car. And once you have something protected, don't pile on and add additional protections to that. So you can list them, you can highlight incentives. We don't usually see a lot of that because people should argue about was incentives made or were they not. Let's go to the next slide. But from the vendor community, I'm looking, will the cash flow work? Am I loaning the agency money? Every firm, the biggest firm in America in this business, is serious about cash flow. And it's not, none of these corporations are monolithic corporations. Who you're dealing with is a small cell, a self-contained cell, usually, that has their budget numbers and their cash flow objectives, and they need to meet them on that. Is there a holdback? How is it released? Do you release it all at the end? That's not a good practice. Look for it as it goes to the next phase in the system development life cycle, as it goes from design to development. Any holdback in design should perhaps be released when you say that design's ready to go in development. Any holdbacks in development should be released when it's ready to go in the implementation, and so forth. Is there a warranty? Again, I don't see a lot of value for vendors or for the state in warranties. You can look at your own states and see how many times vendors are in there fixing things for free for you. I don't see that a lot, at least in my history. Is there a cap on penalties? If there's no cap, if the person who's making the decision from the vendor side, are we going to bid this or not, sees no cap at all, it could be additive and exponential over and over again. I could lose the whole company. It's not fiduciary responsible for a vendor to bid under those circumstances. And there's some more on the next slide. Are these service level agreements? Now this usually occurs, the service level agreements occur when it's in maintenance and operations. And, are they based on industry standards? If it's within 0.5 milliseconds for most of the industry, when you say 0.2, do you know what you're paying for to get that little infinitesimal bit better, that is better than the industry standard? You could seriously increase the price by 40% with almost no payback in benefits to the state. Are the SLAs that you use, are they in the vendor's control? Response time can be an example on a web-based system. When you measure that, what are we measuring? Is somebody out in the boondocks using a dial-up? It needs to be in a closed environment so that any of the problems or disruption in service can be attributed to what the system that the vendor put in there. And this, I think, is a very good industry practice when you go to maintenance and operations for service level agreements. Have a grace period for about 6 months. Let things settle down a little bit. That's a new best practice that's emerging, and I think it's in everybody's best interest, rather than piling on penalties right when a system is coming up and you're encountering data that you never expected to encounter, and the vendor's in there trying to fix it. The penalties aren't that helpful. Once you get to the stabilization period, and you now have a benchmark, you might want to readdress those service level agreements and move forward from there. Some events that occur, data corruption, for example, could hit multiple service level agreements. And so I have one error, and 19 SLAs are ringing up the board, and it can drain me of money on that. You should have a cap on that and limit the failures to the most significant penalty, and not have all the children of that penalty come on board as well. Next one, please. Okay, T's and C's. Say, well, a lot of vendors, guys like me, a business development guy, these are, this is a lot of boilerplate, and you need this boilerplate. It should be boilerplate to the procurement type. Commodity boilerplate probably shouldn't be in the solution, and vice versa. On that, so you want to see if your T's and C's are relevant to the procurement type. You want to state, are exceptions allowed? Are no exceptions allowed? Is this take it or leave it? Are there any limitations on liabilities? Oklahoma was a famous state where the Attorney General, said in a written briefing that they weren't going to have any limitations on liability, and they couldn't get anybody to bid on their jobs, and so they've reversed that down there. But if you're silent on limitation of liability, then the vendor assumes that there is no limitation. So in the companies, this is what the vendor's contracts people sign off on. They don't know much about the solution or your program. They're reading this strictly through legal eyeglasses to identify legal risk. They're paid to protect the company, and you can't argue with them. When they say, no, we can't meet this, nobody's going to listen to the sales guy and say, oh yeah, we can. That's a bad legal opinion on that. So make a partnership with your procurement folks and your contract folks to make sure that you're including the T's and C's that are relevant to the type of procurement, to what you're procuring, and not let it be just a holding basket of everything under the sun that is in your procurement regulations for all types of procurements in there. Next slide, please. Okay, you may recall that early in the introduction that Joyce gave me, I ran a proposal shop, and we pumped out about 100 proposals a year. That's 2 a week. About a dozen people working for me, and it was a production shop. It's got big printers, color printers, all those types of things, and binders, and there are real considerations associated with it. But when you put together that section of your proposal, of your RFP, that says, this is what your proposal format should look like. The very first thing I look at is, does the format align with the evaluation criteria? So later on, we'll talk about evaluation criteria, but if there's an evaluation criteria, there should be one place in the proposal format where it's very clear that's where I should be addressing that evaluation criteria. I like page limits. I think they eliminate a lot of fluff and marketing brochures in the responses that you receive. Under spreadsheets, this is coming pretty common now on the cost proposal that a state procurement shop puts out an Excel spreadsheet, and we vendors enter in the numbers, and it calculates our price. Well, make sure it's correct when it does the calculation. They sometimes are not. They don't consider inflation factors that you've allowed in there. And also, when you get to the cells on the spreadsheet that are going to be the cells that you actually score, the totals, those should be in bold so everybody knows that's what we're driving for, and that's what you're going to look at. Electronic submissions are becoming more and more, and obviously the production shop likes that, putting together in PDFs or flash drives. One state actually gets their and demands that they get it on iPads. On that, There's one continuous page numbering for each section. When we're putting together a section, we like to page number that section. So section 2 would be 2-1 to 2-N. Some RFPs come out and say they have to be continuous, from the beginning to the end. Well, that means we can't print anything until everything's ready, and that really holds up the shop. It seems minor, but it's actually a very annoying administrative burden. Okay, next one, please. Your process schedule. So this is your process for dealing with vendors once the RFP is on the street. So we look at it first. Is there enough time between when you put out the RFP and when the due date is? 30 days is seriously the bare minimum on turnaround, and that's for professional services only. On solutions, especially complex solutions, 90 days is what you need. A lot of teaming goes on, and those teaming agreements between organizations, corporate organizations, require a lot of lawyers and a lot of meetings. And getting the best team in place is really valuable to you as well. But don't cut it real tight. And a lot of times you don't have a choice. These dates come down from on high. On the Q&A, please consider having 2 rounds of Q&A whenever possible. So you have 1 round of questions, and here's that second bite of the apple. Vendors get responses. We might have a question about that response. This is very helpful, and that's a best practice as well. Next one, please. Evaluation and award. Down at the bottom, the takeaway here is your evaluation criteria is, to us, to the vendors, this is what you value. This is what the state values. And when you write them that way, because that's what we should respond with. If it's not what you value, try writing it again. The evaluation criteria should be relevant to the procurement type. I think that's pretty obvious on that. There should be weights. If there's no weights, and you say we're going to, we're going to consider these evaluation criteria, but not in this order. We're not going to assign any weights. Well, you're telling me that you're going to have a subjective view here rather than an objective view on that, and that you can move around. It's hard for me to tell if you did a good job of evaluating apples to apples on that. Is there best and final an offer? Are there orals? Don't overweight orals. I've seen an increasing number of RFPs where the orals gets almost as much weight as the technical proposal. I think orals are important, and you should want to work with people you want to work with. And some people can really wow you. But they may not be the people who are going to show up. You're really making a contract with the corporation. And the corporation put a proposal together, and a 1 hour, 2 hour oral being as critical as a proposal that took 90 days to put together, that seems a little out of balance to me. Next one, please. This is kind of a push and pull problem here. That you have a quiet period, where and that quiet period when you don't talk to vendors anymore about procurement, that shouldn't start until the RFP hits the street, and then it should definitely start. But before that, if no vendor has sat down and talked with you, if you didn't have a vendor day, there's no conferences, there's no demonstration. When a business development guy goes to his corporate management and says, we'd like to bid the system in the state, put it up there, have you ever met with him? if the answer is no, they throw you out of the room. There's got to be a way, and a controlled way, of having conversations with vendors that do not deteriorate the integrity of the procurement process. And you need to work with your procurement people to find that. A lot of times they'll say, oh, that's our procurement rules. Well, make them show you that rule that says you can't talk to a vendor. And if you do have strict rules, then consider going to a conference such as ISM, or if you can, some of your representatives, and visiting with all those vendors at their booth in a public forum, so that at least some contact is there. This is really kind of critical, the customer comfort level. If there's no comfort level, it's really hard to spend several $100,000, if not $1 million, on a proposal when they don't know anybody in your corporation. Next one, please. Hey. Well, I've been talking a lot. We're at a Q&A.
Yep, we'll give you a second to rest your voice. And Millicent, if you could
I'm going to grab some water.
Yeah, Millicent, if you could remind our audience how to line up for Q&A, that would be great.
Absolutely, I'll be glad to. At this time, we will go into our second Q&A session. If you have any questions, please dial *1 to record your first name. Your name is required to introduce your question. If you would like to withdraw your question, you may press *2. Again, that is *1 to ask and *2 to withdraw. One moment, please, for our first question.
While we're waiting for callers to line up, I'll give you a couple questions that have come in via the chat box. And for folks on the line, you can also submit questions via the chat box if you'd like. So first question, when you look at all the requirements, do you also want to know what the state's bringing to the project in terms of the staff they're going to dedicate to the projects and what kind of executive attention? How much is that information important or valuable for you as a vendor to know?
Well, it's very important for everybody to be upfront about that. You know, it's going back to that one where the org chart. I'm looking hopefully for an org chart of also of the vendor staff that's going to be assigned to the team. You know, Delaware is a state that I've had a lot of work with in the past, and they say right in their RFPs, we don't have a lot of staff. We're a small state, and they make that very clear up front. But there's a reason, you know, there's an expectation of good communication in the RFP of how many staff, are they part-time, are they full-time, is this a priority for them, is everybody part-time on it? It's very helpful to know those things.
And second question, can you talk a little bit about the relationship between perceived risk and cost? So, for example, if you think the state doesn't have enough project staff or some of the requirements aren't clear, that we assume would translate into a higher cost. But is there sort of a rule of thumb for what the relationship is between those two?
Well, on the requirements, if requirements are not clear, you know, vendor A could say, well, I can talk them into that our system already does that, and you know, and try to keep their costs down, and vendor B might take the opposite approach. There's, in terms of a mathematical calculation, not so much. It gets to be a gut feel. But, you know, we call it a tax. And you may say that we need to put a 10% tax on this. These guys are confused.
A risk tax.
Yes.
Millicent, do we have any callers on the line?
At this time, we do not have any questions in queue.
Okay, I still have a few more online questions. And folks that are listening, if you've got any questions, it's *1 to queue up to ask questions on the phone. So, Dave, in your experience looking at RFPs that come from states, in general, you know, sort of without calling anybody out in particular, but do you think they do a good job of articulating requirements? Or on average, when you read state-generated RFPs, are the requirements clear? Or if not, how could states write them more clearly?
Well, I'd like to make sure when we use the word requirement that we're talking about the same thing. So if it's the requirement of what the vendor needs to do, you know, that they need these types of staff and they need to meet this schedule. I think that's good. I think they come out with okay. If you're talking about the detailed requirements of what the system has to do, you know, that the automated case assignment based when someone's out sick or an office closes, and you get way down into the weeds on that, that's where we get back to the point about, are you defining a problem or are you defining a solution? And in the past, the vast majority of the RFP, hundreds of pages, were spent with little tiny requirement statements that almost at an if-then-else level, and there'd be a chart and say, does your system meet it? Yes, no, with modifications, complex modifications, simple modifications, whatever. And people go through that score sheet and they said, oh, okay, we need 70% of this. Well, in modern system development, what we found in looking back on that, is by the time that system delivered, some of those requirements had changed. And it made sense when you were really trying to automate manual processes that those requirements need to be that detailed. If you're not, if you've got a problem, then describe it and let people define a solution for you.
Mm-hmm. I think that's where you also talked about, too, where you start to see so many of the specific requirements that you start wondering if the state hasn't already seen something that they're looking for specifically.
Yeah, and that's not fair all the time, because many times they're going through that these are the requirements of a federally certified child support system, or a federally certified CWIS system. I don't think that's the word you use anymore, Terry. You're still there. And so they throw that in there. Well, I mean, the problem is you need your system certified. So arguing about the details about, you know, it'd be like walking into a house and talking about, you know, this light switch kind of needs to be over there. Your problem is you don't want to be in the dark when you eat dinner. And that's really, I think, what your state management and what the system state really expect you to do is solve problems. And I said, this is new, and it's changing, and it's evolving. Yes.
Dave, this is Joyce.
Hey, Joyce.
Joyce Rose, I have two questions to ask you. In terms of from the vendor perspective, which do you believe contains the most risk? To do a statewide implementation of a transfer system that requires modifications, or to do new development?
It's I don't think there is much new development anymore. You know, that people, you know, from scratch, we're going to go up to an easel board and say, okay, we're going to do reporting, and we're going to do intake, we're going to do assessment, and let's draw up screens from scratch and do that. You're not going to see that. Those days are done on that. The transfer system was seemed like a reasonable approach that had very mixed results. And sometimes the results went very well, and the state could go from A to B, and 18 months later it was working, and people were reasonably satisfied, and state B took advantage of lessons learned and saved money. And in many places, the first day, and I've been at meetings like this when I was doing project management, well, we may have said we're buying that other state system, but that's not going to work here. You know, so you can just put that away, and let me tell you how it's going to work. And there wasn't a technical reason why it wouldn't work. Technology, very few of the projects fail based on technology. Mm-hmm. It's really the single biggest success factor is, does the state want to succeed?
Okay. Thank you. So now my other question, and I hope I'm going to turn the tables on you just a little bit. I hope this is okay. But you identified things that states may do in their RFPs which increase risk to the vendor community in terms of their responses. On the flip side, what cautionary advice do you have for states in terms of what vendors may do that signal risk to the state in the responses?
Okay, let me think about that for a minute. One thing that jumps to mind is when you the vendor shows up with a marquee player at orals who's got many years of experience and is widely known and a respected speaker and just talk for days. Well, are you really going to see that guy? Mm-hmm. So if he's not in there as a billable person, you're not going to see him, and you should be aware of that. So say, well, we have an executive board of child welfare specialists, and they go around and they visit on our projects and make sure that the latest in assessment techniques are being applied. And really, call one of their customers and ask them how many times they see that person, and check that out. Well, I'm trying to think that the real risk is the people. It's one thing for me to have the qual. So as a corporation, I have a qual that I did this in this North State, and I can do it in the South State, and we did it, and North State gives me good references. You actually want to see people who worked in North State come to South State. If the resumes and the qual references don't match, all of these things are true, but they're missing the point.
Thank you, and I hope I didn't throw you a curveball.
No, and be careful about conversion too. Going to a technical side, and everybody needs to be careful about conversion. Conversion is a mess, and it's very difficult, and that really requires it to be almost a project within a project. Make sure things like conversion, training, get the level of attention that they deserve. One thing that bothers me is, well, why'd you lose? Well, the other guy was cheaper. Oh, okay, that makes sense. It was a staffing thing, the other guy was cheaper. He should work. But when you look at the hours, there was half the hours in the winning stop. There needs to be a reasonable factor.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Millicent, do we have anybody on the line?
No, ma'am. At present, there are no questions in queue.
Okay. I've got a few more online, and we have about 13 minutes left. So, Dave, if you've still got a little voice, we still have a few more questions for you.
All right. Okay. All right.
So, as a vendor, what's most helpful to you in trying to make a bid, no-bid decision? Reading the RFP, meeting with state personnel prior to the procurement period, an on-site bidder conference. So, in other words, what do you find really helpful, and what do you think is just something else that adds to your cost but doesn't really give you a lot of benefit when you're either making a bid, no-bid decision or when you're preparing your RFP response?
I'm very disappointed in many bidders conferences I go to, and I sometimes blame the state, and sometimes I blame the vendor community because they sit there on their hands and don't ask any questions because supposedly they don't want to reveal their grand strategy. And I like bidders conferences, but they're getting less and less relevant. And I think that's disappointing that when the state stands up and says, "Are there any questions?" and nobody says anything, and they say, "Well, that's it. Thanks for coming." and we're over, you didn't give anybody a fair shot. Once one person asks the questions, a few follow. I think bidders conferences should be where you read through the RFP section by section. Do you have any questions on this? When we say this, this is what we mean. That's relevant. The other one was meeting with the customer. Of course, I like to meet with the customer. I don't want them to meet with anybody else, but that's not fair. So I'd like. I think when you have a vendor day and some type of opportunity to look people in the eye and talk about, well, what is it that's driving you here? That's key. But the RFP, the details of the RFP really do rule if I'm going to bid or not for me. Bidders conference, unfortunately, they need to be better. They should be. You're making the attempt, and I'm embarrassed that many of my counterparts really don't take advantage of it.
So you had said, sort of to have the state walking through the RFP section by section and asking, the prospective vendors if they have questions about that section or clarifying what they mean in different sections. What other tips do you have for states about hosting a really effective bidders conference? What would your dream bidders conference look like? Besides for you?
Well, there'd be a procurement guy there. There'd be more than just the project manager there. There'd be the team that you've identified, hopefully in the RFP, that they'd be there. And, and they would say things as well, like, I'm, in charge of staff development, and here's what's important about training to me. And I'm going to make sure when this system's up that my people have these skill sets. And I want to hear from you when your proposal, this is important to me, how you're going to make that happen. It should be a little challenging. This is what I'm interested in hearing from you guys.
That's fair. That's the kind of stuff, too, that wouldn't necessarily be laid out quite necessarily so clearly in an RFP. So that's, that would really...
Oh, no. The RFP says, there's a bidders conference, there's not a bidders conference, it's mandatory or it's not mandatory.
Right.
And by the way, any answers we give you are not, binding until you see them in writing. And that's okay.
Yeah.
But to me, it's the bare minimum you can do is to have a bidders conference. So in some jobs you don't need it. Clearly you don't need them on the commodity, and some of the staffing jobs you don't. Some states are challenged in terms of travel. States like Hawaii, Alaska, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands are challenged there. And I don't see why teleconference isn't used more often for bidders conference. We're doing that today.
Yeah, absolutely. And another question from online: when states ask for references, obviously as vendors you tend to give them the names of people who are going to speak highly of them, I would assume. How can states realistically find out a really good assessment of a vendor's staff's qualifications and ability to do the work?
Well, we see more and more emphasis on this. Are we talking staff, you think, or are we talking the corporation?
I think staff seemed to be the way the question was written.
Well, the mini RFP says, we reserve the right to talk to other folks besides who you list as references. But I would look to see what associations they belong to. I think standards and credentials, as the industry has matured, are much more important than they were when I came into the business. And I think that does give you some level of quality. I think you can do interviews with people over the phone with key staff as part of your technical evaluation. But that's tough, and we struggle with it. I've gotten great resumes and called references and hired the persons and didn't work out. I'm not sure I have a great answer for that.
And then last question that I have online. Have you ever read an RFP and maybe based on your experience or best practices thought the state just doesn't have enough staff or they haven't planned enough testing or training or something like that that would affect a bid decision, or is this, again, something you would just account for with your risk tax?
Well, the risk test doesn't, it doesn't overcome everything. If you read the RFP and you know it's a train wreck, that it's not going to happen, but the governor or some legislature says, this has got to be done in 6 months' time, and all of this, and you look at it, there's no amount of money. The smartest decisions I've ever made are on the jobs I didn't bid. It's where I looked at it and thought, I could win this. I could at least get in the top 2. I've got the quals, I got the people, talk to them, but it just isn't possible to make these people happy based on what this RFP says and to walk away from it. This big shining or tarnished example, actually, of healthcare.gov is a lesson for all of us to take a look at that and what happened. That was a project, and the bigger projects they are, it's just like banks. They become too big to fail. We're going to have a Medicaid enterprise. Okay, well, let's define that. Oh, well, everything's in there. Everything. Oh, okay. And we're going to do that in 12 months. Yeah. Let me out of here. Because you can be too big to fail, and also group think. If the political powers that be are behind this happening, it's hard to report that it's not happening for those reports to go up. And that occurs in private industry as well. And that group think and too big to fail, when you combine them, you end up with colossal failures, not small ones.
I think that's an excellent point that you make, too. I love the way that you said that the best decisions, some of the best decisions you've ever made have been no-bid decisions. And I think the downside to that is that, states don't know why people who don't bid necessarily. And so if they put an RFP out and they get no responses or very few responses, maybe that's a good time to sort of look at what they've written and figure out if there's not something in there that just made it impossible for vendors to do the work in the time allotted or the cost available or what it was they were asking for. Like you said, that they're asking for staff that just don't exist. So I think that's actually a really good point.
And you can have a survey. Vendors will certainly respond to you if you say, hey, we're going to call vendors that we thought were going to bid, and we'd like to talk to you about why you didn't, and so we can improve our communication in the future. You'll get great ideas. I've been involved with a couple of those, and it was very helpful.
Yeah. It's never the case that you're making enough money and you don't need to make any more.
That's never the case. Yes, Joyce?
This is a good point, I think, a good segue that states really should work closely with their analysts, because their analysts have a lot of experience looking at RFPs, and they can zero in on segments of an RFP that may discourage responses. So I just want to plug the fact that the state ACF analyst relationship is really important when developing an RFP and working towards getting good and significant number of responses.
Millicent, do we have any other questions on the line?
Yes, we do have one that has just arrived.
Okay.
I will bring that up so that they can voice their question. Guest, your line is open.
Dave, this is Patricia. My question is, how helpful is it for you when you bid and lose to, have a debrief with the state or, the offer of the RFP to find out, how you could have done a better job? Is this something that states should be ready for?
Oh, absolutely. I do it on every one. I request it. Some I learn from. Others, everybody kind of looks at their shoes and they're uncomfortable, and there's no reason to be uncomfortable. This is not like the Olympics where 3 people get a medal. There's only one winner, and sometimes it's really, really close. And at the debrief, you don't need to be brutally honest, but where we messed up, where we got, did we contradict ourselves? Did we not hear you correctly? This is very helpful, and management really wants to hear that. I write up a report, I send it up, we get together. So please, welcome those debriefings, and I think you'll find it's a learning experience. It will not be a complaint session, I'll tell you that.
Millicent, any other questions before we turn it back over to Joyce?
No, there are no further questions in the queue.
Okay, Joyce, I turn it back over to you.
Okay, let's go to the last slide. So, today we have shared with you a vendor's perspective regarding the value and content within each section of an RFP, certainly the importance of aligning RFP requirements with the procurement type, and then some insights on how to improve your future RFPs in order to get more and better responses from the vendor community. We certainly hope all of you who have attended this webinar has found the information to be both informative and valuable as you move forward with your Child Welfare Information System initiatives. Again, our thanks to our vendor presenter, Mr. Dave Jennings. Thanks, Dave.
It was fun. Thanks.
Great. If any of the attendees have any questions or would like more information, please do not hesitate to contact me at the email listed on the slide, joyce@kassets.com. Again, this webinar has been recorded and will be made available online. When it is complete and posted, we will send a message via the CWIS Manager's listserv with the link. Thank you for attending, and please watch for information for the next Children's Bureau-sponsored web event. Again, thank you and goodbye.
This now concludes today's conference. All lines may disconnect at this time.